Welcome to episode 155 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, so the word all spelled out, SEVEN health.com/155.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. Or if this is the first episode, thanks for giving it a listen, and I hope you'll stick around and become a regular listener. So this week it's another guest interview, but before I talk about the guest, I just want to mention something that I'm going to be doing a little differently moving forward. So up until this point, most of the guest interviews have been around the hour mark. So some a little longer, some a little shorter, but typically when I've invited guests on the show, this is always what I suggest they put in the calendar, so to make it an hour. And while an hour feels like a decent amount of time, it actually isn't that long when doing an interview. And what I've been finding was that at certain points, these conversations were sounding and feeling less like conversations and more like me asking a question, the person would respond, and me then just going on to another question. And before I talk to a guest, I do a ton of prep work. So I'm normally familiar with their work, which is why I've invited them to come on the show. But I spend many hours going through their blog, their social media, listening to their podcasts or podcasts they've been on, reading their book if they've got a book, like whatever material I can find that is relevant. And I try not to overdo it. I don't want the conversation to be boring for me. I want it to be interesting. So I don't want to be asking questions where I know the answer to every single question. But I do want to have a baseline knowledge so that I have ideas for where to go with the conversation. And with this, what I've been finding is that having an hour time limit can really hem me in. Like someone will say something that sounds interesting that I'd love to explore, but then I have these other topics that I want to hit. And so I'm worried about going down some path that chews up a lot of time and then I miss out on this other idea that I wanted to or hope to cover. And I think subconsciously it can also do the same for guests. Like they don't want to stray too far from what they normally say on a podcast because they have limited time to showcase their best ideas. And it ends up being less of a conversation and more of people simply trying to answer questions in the most articulate way that keeps them on this like narrow course. And I think some kind of reasonable time restraint or constraint is helpful. Like making conversations longer for the sake of it doesn't make for a better episode. I've listened to many Joe Rogan podcasts that are 3 hours long, more than 3 hours long, and it felt like the vast majority of that was just nonsense and didn't go anywhere. I think he's done some great podcasts that are 3 hours long, but not all the time. And so what I've started to do now with booking in guests is to specifically ask them to block out 2 hours. And I mentioned in the email that the episode will most likely be shorter than this, but I want to give both of us the time and the space to feel like there's no rush and we can explore different areas and we've got a chance to have a proper conversation. And so this week's episode is the first in this new experiment. It's about an hour, 40 minutes, excluding this intro, so significantly longer than the usual podcasts, or at least the usual interview podcasts. And at least to me, it doesn't feel verbose. I much preferred this format and felt more relaxed, although this could also be a lot to do with the guest, with Stephanie, as she was someone who's very easy to chat with. And so I just wanted to mention this, and you can see how you find it over the next handful of guest episodes. If you like this change, if you don't like this change, like reach out and let me know. I'm always open to feedback, even if that is constructive criticism. So the email for that is info@7-health.com. And so that is it on the housekeeping front. I just wanted to mention it. And this week's show is with my guest, Stephanie Dankelson. So Stephanie is a writer, a podcast host, a certified body and self-acceptance coach. She's passionate about helping people end the battle with themselves and their bodies so they can uncover what it means to live the life they deeply desire. From the age of 14, Stephanie struggled with disordered eating, exercise addiction, and body image issues, which led to over 10 years of external seeking of approval, endless perfectionism, numbing her emotionality, and feeling disconnected to who she wanted to be on this earth. It wasn't until she learned what it meant to drop out of her head and into her body to truly understand her worth that she was able to start healing and feel whole again. Stephanie is now helping others learn how to not only feel freedom around themselves and their bodies, but deeply know their worth through one-on-one coaching, online courses, and her podcast, Move with Radiance. So I became aware of Stephanie last year when she reached out and invited me to be on her podcast show. She'd heard my episode on weight set point theory, which is episode 114, and wanted me to come on the show and to chat about it. And we had a great conversation. I really liked her questions, and it just felt very easy and natural. I subsequently checked out her podcast and really liked what she was talking about and doing, and thought she would make a great guest. And so here we are. A lot of this conversation is delving into Stephanie's story, her relationship with food, with her body, with exercise. We chat about how her identity as the healthy one amongst her friends and family impacted on things. We talk about her sobriety and her deciding to give up alcohol indefinitely. And then we go through many of the things that she works on with clients, like sitting with difficult emotions, mindfulness, self-compassion, resources that she found helpful, and much more. So with all that preamble out of the way, here is my conversation with Stephanie Dankelson. Hey, Stephanie, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me tonight.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So, I was recently on your podcast show where we had a fairly in-depth discussion about weight set point theory, and you're a great interviewer, and I really loved our conversation. And since then, I've been listening to your podcast and think you're doing really great work. So I'm looking forward to being able to chat with you again, although with me doing the question asking this time. And I think it'll be a mix of like you and your story, as well as delving into the work that you now do with clients. And so a lot of the work that you do with clients is wrapped up around like relationship with food stuff. So what was food like for you growing up in your household?
Yeah, good question. So when I look back at just my relationship with food and my journey, the part that really comes to mind is 7th grade for me. I feel like middle school was I feel like that's hard for everybody, but that was sort of the point for me when I started realizing, one, that my body was changing. And I specifically remember trying on a pair of my friend's pants, and they didn't fit me anymore. And so I started noticing that my body was just changing, and it was different than everybody else's. And I think too, at that point in my life, again, middle school was really hard. And so I felt this deep desire to be accepted by other people. And so middle school, when I felt really outcasted and noticed looks for me played a really big role, and just getting a lot of comments on, oh, that's an interesting shirt, or that's an interesting hairstyle today, Stephanie. It was like, that was when I started really being body conscious. And as I started going throughout school, I think right around like high school, I got my braces off and I got my contacts, and changed my hair and started dressing differently and really paying attention to how everybody else was doing it. And that's when I started getting attention. And so at that point in my life, I started associating my body to getting attention and being accepted. And right around, I would say, middle of high school, I started doing cross country and long distance sports. And that was when my food restriction really began. And I started becoming extremely obsessed with exercising and calorie restriction. And I started seeing, I wasn't super active. And so the moment I started running, that was when my body really changed. And I started just becoming obsessed with losing weight. And I remember I found my journal recently that I wrote all throughout high school. And I remember writing down, I read, I'm obsessed with losing weight and with exercise. And again, it kind of came back to like my worth being all wrapped up into it. And I was seeking so much for validation, and there was so much of like proving myself in everything that I was doing. And I started it was so easy for me to see the results of, I exercise and I restrict and I lose weight and then I get the validation, and I craved that. And in college, it got really, really easy for me to restrict and hide that I was restricting and hide like how much I was exercising. And I think just too, in this world right now, health and all of this stuff is wrapped up in how much you exercise and what you eat. Yep. And so I was praised for that. Like everyone was like, oh, you're so healthy. Like you're so healthy. And so I again wanted that validation. And so that sort of became my identity, was like, you're the fit girl. And in that process, I just remember being so miserable and getting to this point where I was like, why is everyone else not obsessed with food and the way that I am? Like, why is it that when I eat ice cream, I'm so guilty, but I'm watching all of my friends just enjoy their food and have a good time? And there just became this point where I was realizing like how unhappy I was and how lost I became and how wrapped up I was in this pursuit of weight loss and this like constant battle with the mirror. And that really just continued all throughout college. Do you want me to, did you have any questions there?
I was just, there's lots of questions I have around that. So you said that it really kicked off around middle school, but so earlier than that, you were pretty, unconscious of your body. You didn't really think about food. Like it was just that point that it changed for you.
Yeah. And it's interesting you asked that, because I've started really, like, as I was doing this work, I started thinking like, what was my relationship with food like? And, the more the more stories I hear from other people, the more I'm like, my relationship with food was always good. I remember, our family always gathering around the table at night to eat dinner together. And my mom was always really passionate about cooking. I was really passionate about food and cooking for a long time. And, I remember watching Food Network and really loving food. And so it really, I think, became this. I do remember people making, like, people in my life making comments about their bodies. It was never about my body, but I think looking back and just seeing certain people in my life now still making those comments about their bodies, I think subconsciously I picked up on that and just started thinking like, oh, okay, well, if that person can't wear that shirt, then maybe I should be really paying attention to the clothes that I wear. Again, I don't think that was like, I wasn't aware of that, but looking back, I think that the comments that people in my life made about their bodies rubbed off on me eventually. Yeah. And so, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And when you were saying they were making comments about their body, was there also dieting that was going on with those either family members or those friends that you were noticing?
I think so. It wasn't, again, like
like it wasn't out in the open dieting. Yeah. Where they're like, hey, why don't you come with me to, I don't know, Weight Watchers or something along those lines.
Right. It was never towards me. It was always them.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it was like they were always making comments about their body or maybe what they were eating, and I shouldn't be doing this, but it was never directed towards me. I just think I picked up on it, which is so interesting.
Yeah. And so when you started that journey of dieting and you were restricting calories, again, was that a solo pursuit, or were you chatting about it with friends at school?
No. So, well, there was one of my closer friends growing up. They were also kind of thinking about this kind of stuff too. And so there was only really one person that I confided in growing up, but it was never like, I never told anybody else that how badly I was struggling with wanting to lose weight. I think for me, the outward projection of it was always, I'm trying to be healthy. I'm trying to be fit. It was never, I don't like my body. I didn't share that information until later in college, but it was mostly solo or with one other person that sort of knew how bad I was struggling with it.
And with the idea of like being fit or being healthy, was that something that was really praised within either your family or within your peer groups?
I grew up in the Midwest, and so a lot of the people around me, I think because like I was so dressed, like I was vegetarian. I was so into like, again, the quote, what people, because I now have a larger, broader definition of health. It's hard for me to talk about, you know what I mean? But at the time I had such a narrow view of what healthy meant. And because that was so drastically different than what everyone else was doing around me, I was praised for that. And so I think because I wanted to be seen as like good, or I really was so craving praise or some sort of like validation just in general, that I craved that. And when people would praise me for, oh, you're so healthy, you're so fit, it like motivated me to continue down that path. And I got to a point in my life where I was so identified with that. I couldn't even fathom separating from that identity.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something I've heard a lot from clients is like, what are my friends going to think? Like if they see me eating like fill in the blank food, but not just like what are my friends going to think, but like what am I going to think, or who am I without this? Because for so long, that is how they have sort of projected onto the world.
Yes. And that was really a big part of my story too, because I was a triathlete in college, and I was so like, people knew me as the triathlete, the fitness instructor, and everything about me was fitness. Everything about me was health, quote, health related. And when I started questioning all of this and thinking like, wait a minute, like, first of all, who am I at the core without all of this? I don't even know. I was, comparing myself to everybody 24/7, trying to be what everyone else wanted me to be. And secondly, like when I started questioning, well, what do I want for my life? It was really hard for me to separate myself from that, the fitness and the triathlete side of me that I've so identified with for so many years. And that was a really big part of my story, and taking a step back and saying, okay, wait a minute, what is it that I actually want for my life aside from all of this? Is this actually making me happy? Or am I just doing this because people know me as this, and I want to make sure that like they don't forget me as that? You know what I mean? Yeah.
And did you enjoy the exercise side of it, or that became just so overwhelming? There was so much overtraining type thing that lost it, whatever joy it provided.
Yeah, I think, and I thought about this a lot too. And looking back, I realized the only reason because I was like, I love exercising. And the only reason I think I really enjoyed it at that time was because it was directly related to my weight loss or the pursuit of wanting to be a smaller size. And the point in my life when I moved away from college, and I basically started over in a new state and was by myself, and just realized like, I don't think I like this kind of stuff, because I was trying to get involved in triathlons when I moved to Colorado, and trying to continue what I was doing in college. And it really was not fulfilling anymore. And I was like, I don't like running 14 miles and, sitting on a bike trainer in my house. And I don't like this anymore. And that became really difficult for me, was again, like, because it was such a part of my identity, I didn't know what to do. Yeah. In separating myself from that.
And was the part of separating the identity also difficult because, I don't know, all of your friends are now triathletes because you spend so much time in that world, and so you're almost having to walk away from a lot of the social connection that you have?
Yeah, it was like totally starting over and just thinking like, okay, well, all of my friends here, they do that thing. And now I don't like to do that thing. So do I need to find new friends? And how do I navigate this new life? And what kind of people do I seek out? Because for so many years, the friends that I sought out were athletes in that area. And so now it was like stepping back and really evaluating, what do I actually enjoy outside of exercise? What is it that I'm super passionate? Like, can I be passionate about something else? And what does that look like? And who am I?
Yeah.
What do I want out of this life? And I don't think I ever asked myself that question. It was always, what does everybody else want from me? What is everyone else expecting from me? And so it was hard to sit down and really evaluate, what is it that I want and what do I want out of this life?
Sure. And so when you left school and then went off to college or university, like what did you originally study?
So I was studying speech therapy. And then I actually biked across the country in 2011. So that was my junior year in college. And when I did that, I came back and thought, well, okay, so take a step back. I was studying speech therapy, and then I decided to switch to exercise physiology or something in that space, because I thought, okay, no, I'm really passionate about exercise, so maybe I'll do that. And then when I biked across the country, I came back, and that point was when I started slightly questioning my eating habits and how much I was eating, and what I wanted from life. That was the point where I started questioning things. And so I switched my major to business and thought, okay, well, this gives me, a wider, maybe I'll do something like this broadens my options.
Yeah.
And then when I moved, that was when I was kind of faced with completely starting over. And that's when I really dove into what is it that I want?
Okay. And so what was the biking across the country? Was that something you did with friends, or how did that come about?
Yeah. So one of the women in my triathlon group, she brought it up to me because she was doing it, and it's called a bike and build. And essentially it was a bike across the country with other young adults. And there were multiple different routes across the US. And so this trip, it was all about affordable housing. And so we were sort of helping the community, as well as just being able to, see the entire country. And at that point, I'd never been west of Missouri. So I'd never seen the mountains. I had never really explored outside of Ohio much. And so my I told people, this is just a great opportunity for me to see the country and for me to help out with just affordable housing and such a great cause. But deep down, I was thinking cool, I'm going to lose so much weight because we're going to be cycling, 75 miles a day, and there's just going to be so much activity, and I can't wait to just be on my bike all day, and it's going to be so great. And when I started riding, I physically could not continue riding with the amount of calories that I was consuming. Yeah. And that was when I started understanding oh, I need to eat in order for me to move my body. And that's when I started thinking, is this lifestyle actually working for me with such low calorie consumption?
And you said that you were praised as the fit one or the healthy one, and that was your identity. Was there anyone who was flagging this as I think this could be a problem, or did anyone ever say anything to you of maybe you need to cool it on the exercise, or maybe you need to be eating more, or anything like that?
No. And I think it was because I hid it so well. I don't think people knew the extent of how much I was exercising and how little I was eating, because when I was around people, I would eat and then I would restrict if I felt like I ate too much. So I don't think there were any external red flags, because I was so good at hiding it and so good at just turning on this everything is perfect face, or wearing that mask was so easy for me to flip it on when I needed to.
Okay. And even with boyfriends, partners, that kind of thing?
I think, yeah, I guess thinking about one person in particular, he he started making comments like, well, shouldn't you, I mean, it's okay if you eat this oatmeal, you don't have to count the calories in this. And that was sort of around the time of my trip as well. And so I think that with him sort of implanting or I guess even watching how he ate, because he was also a triathlete, that was when I started noticing like, wow, he eats a lot and he's still able to be, again, like, not like this is important, but at the time, because I valued body image so much, he was still fit and super thin and really active. And so I was like, oh, he can eat that. Maybe I can eat a little bit more, or I don't know. That was, again, right around that bike trip where I was like starting to question my eating habits, but there was never like, you need help. It was just interesting that you don't want to eat right now, but I would always get really defensive. So I never saw it as a problem. I would just get really angry.
Okay.
And he would point that out.
And so at what point did the kind of the wheels come off, where this started to become a problem, like you had the realization of, okay, this is like, enough is enough?
Yeah. And I would say it was definitely on one of the longer rides on my bike trip, where I was like so tired and like, I can't even describe the feeling of my energy was absolutely depleted. And I think at the time I like, that was when I really started eating more. And then it became harder after the trip to validate like, okay, well, I'm not biking 75 miles. So should I eat this? But I think within the last few years after that bike trip where that seed was planted of like, I don't know if this is working for me, I really do think it was when I moved to Colorado and I was by myself and I was trying to, I like, sorry, this is not super clear.
That's right.
It's crazy because there's so many different moments, because like after I moved to Colorado and I started questioning all of this, I think what happened for me is I almost went on like the whole opposite end of it, where I was living by myself now and I had no friends there. So I really didn't have I didn't have any external motivation to move, like no one was watching me. No one could make comments on like, oh, interesting, you're eating the Oreos. That's out of the norm for you.
Yep.
And so when I started being by myself and questioning my like, okay, I don't want to be restricting. I don't want to be over exercising like this. Like, this is not fun anymore. I almost went to this extreme of like eating a lot and binging with food and alcohol. And I think that it just became almost a numbing mechanism for me because I was so lonely and because I was so confused. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And so how long did that go on? So
that went on for a few years, I would say. I was also dating someone at the time and we were doing long distance. And then he moved to Colorado shortly after I moved, maybe a year after I moved there. But the binging with food and alcohol got really, I don't want to say bad, but it got pretty intense when I was living in my apartment alone that first year after college. And I think that was because, like I said before, I was so confused and I didn't know who I was or what I wanted. And so I was sort of numbing that loneliness and that confusion. But I was also really struggling with the transition from college to full-time working. I was working a really interesting job at the time where I didn't have to go to an office, and it was really like I had requirements and I was working for a large corporation, but I could design my day. I just had to meet certain, tasks that I had to do certain, what are those called? KPIs. Like I had to meet certain things during that time. And I found it really difficult to be self-motivated. and it was weird because I always felt like I was a very self-motivated person in college, but I think I was externally motivated. I didn't want to let anybody down. I didn't want people to judge me. And I think because I was alone, I didn't have that judgment. I could go back to my house and just numb all of the stress and the anxiety with alcohol and food. And I just was even sort of rebelling towards exercise because it wasn't fun for me. And I didn't know how to have fun with exercise and outside of it being this motivating, like you need to lose weight kind of thing. And so that kind of back and forth with food and alcohol went on for, I would say 2 or 3 years until that relationship ended. I wouldn't even say that. I would say up until probably 2016. That was when I started questioning my relationship with alcohol in particular and just the binging side of food.
Okay. And is that, have you had outside help with all this in terms of, have you been to therapists or been to different practitioners to help with this stuff?
No. And you know why? It's because I didn't think I had a problem with alcohol.
Okay.
Because it's so normalized, and in college, you just binge drink. Like that was how everyone socialized. And that was how I let loose. And that was how I let myself be, I don't know, I associated myself with as an awkward person. And with alcohol, I felt that I could let my walls down or I could be fun and let loose and not be anxious and stressed about things. And when I went on to like a quote adult life, that pattern and that mentality carried with me, but I was doing it alone. And again, because alcohol is so normalized, I didn't think it was an issue. I thought everyone came home and, had a glass of wine, but I was having a bottle of wine a night. No one ever talks about alcohol in that. There's I felt for so long there were 2 definitions of it. You either drank alcohol or you were an alcoholic. And I didn't even fathom the fact, I didn't even think that I could be an alcoholic or, you know what I mean? Like that for me was so far-fetched because I didn't feel that I didn't feel like I fell into that definition. So I didn't even question it.
Yeah. In terms of before you were saying there's a stereotype of what it means to be fit and healthy. There's a stereotype of what it means to be like an alcoholic. Right.
And so I didn't even think that it was a problem because everyone else was drinking.
Okay. And so are you now sober and you don't drink at all, or you've got alcohol to a place that you can consume it?
Yeah, I've been sober for about 1.5 years now. And the reason I did that, and this is why, so I also, with all my food and body stuff, I also share a lot of my sobriety story because I want to help change the definition of what it means to be sober, because there is such a negative feeling attached with that word. And I think a lot of people like me had these really 2 extreme definitions of what it meant, or this really extreme definition of what it means to abuse alcohol. And for me, I don't think I ever got to that point where I was needing it to function.
Yeah.
It was just, I got to this point where I didn't know how to deal with my emotionality. I didn't know how to deal with the emotions that we've all labeled as difficult. I didn't know how to deal with the anxiety that I was experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And so I drank. And looking back at my life, I've noticed that was sort of the underlying reason for a lot of my behaviors. I was addicted to exercise and restricting food because that distracted me from feeling the things that were difficult, or I felt a sense of control there. And then I switched it over to binging and numbing out with alcohol and food because, again, I didn't know how to deal with my loneliness. I didn't know how to deal with the stress. And so that helped me cope temporarily. And then when I gave up alcohol, it turned into Netflix and other things. And this whole underlying thing was I just didn't know how to deal with my emotionality. I didn't know how to deal with anything that was uncomfortable. And those are just such normalized vices that it was just easy for me to turn to those things. And so now, is different in that I know how to deal with my emotionality. Becoming sober really helped me look at how to do that, because I couldn't just turn to a glass of wine when things got stressful. It was like, oh, how do I actually deal with the stress? How do I actually learn how to let that be okay? And so my sobriety now is mostly because I just don't feel like having a drink. I think about what will feel good for my body right now. And so far, since I started my sobriety journey, it hasn't felt good. And maybe someday it will, and I'll have a glass of wine or a beer or whatever, and it'll be just to enhance my experience. But that time hasn't come yet. And so I'm just allowing myself to, whenever I want it, I'll have it. But right now it's that just feels the best for my body. And so I'm honoring that.
Sure. And did you have a period where you're like, oh, maybe I can have just a little bit and I can become a kind of normal drinker in inverted commas, like before you got to the point of, okay, I really can't do this. I just need to have no alcohol at all.
Yes. So I started experimenting with this, and I think you interviewed Andrea Owen.
Yep. And she's got an awesome series on alcoholism and her story and other guests.
Yes. And that was her podcast and that series is what sparked everything for me, because I started hearing other people's stories and realizing like, oh, I don't have to be this extreme drinker for me to want to be sober. It can vary, and it can just be person to person and what works for them. And so that really sparked my questioning my own drinking. And that started in 2016. And around that time, I went 6 months without drinking. And I remember being at the hot springs with some friends and thinking, I can have some alcohol. It's fine. I can drink. And so I did that. And for a few months after, I was letting myself have alcohol again. And even just after one or two, I would wake up the next day and just feel awful. And that was when I realized I just don't want this anymore. Yeah. And it wasn't even that I think I was still learning how to deal with my emotionality. And I think there was a piece there too, where I was still like, oh, that was a stressful week. Let's go have a beer. It wasn't until I completely gave up alcohol for good. Well, not for good, but was like, okay, I'm like going back on no alcohol for a while. That next time, so November 2017 and on, that was when I really started learning how to deal with my emotionality, and really saw my different numbing mechanisms and how alcohol for me was a way for me to numb out and a way for me to just not feel. So yeah, and this is what I tell people. I had this gnawing feeling deep down that just kept coming back, this is not working. This is not working. This is not working. And if you're feeling that, honor it and just see what happens when you give up alcohol for a little bit, because I think you just know there's a feeling that you're just like, this is just not working. And that I honored that, and I've never looked back. Yeah.
I mean, the other sort of red flag that comes up is that if someone has a problem doing that, then that is also an issue. I mean, exactly. If I have a conversation with someone around exercise and oh, exercise is fine, it's not that big a deal in my life, or it's not too much of a problem. And I'm like, okay, cool, have some time off exercise. If they're like, whoa, I can't do that, then it kind of illustrates that maybe it is more of a compulsion, or maybe it is more of a problem if you can't have a set amount of time off of it.
Yes, because you're relying on it at that point. There's something about it that you are relying on for something, whether that be comfort or, not being able, control or something. Yeah. That's when I think a behavior, if you can't go without it, that's when we take a step back and say, oh, interesting. Why am I being so reliant on it? Why is it that I can't rely on myself without this thing? What is it bringing me? And starting to shift the behavior or the attachment to the behavior then, for sure. Totally agree.
And so you said that once you removed the alcohol, you were able to pay attention more, or to notice more of your numbing or your various coping skills, whether they were productive or not so productive. Did things get worse though in the beginning? I'm just imagining you've removed this amazing crutch that you have for dealing with those things, and that's now gone. Like, did the eating get worse, or did something else come and try and fill that void?
Netflix. Yes, 100%. It was so fascinating. I remember because the first time I gave it up, I lost my job, and I remember thinking, I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. And for weeks I did that. I was like, oh, this is fine. Even though I was terrified and there were so many things that were coming up for me, I just suppressed and suppressed and suppressed. And I remember thinking, like, when I lost my job, oh yeah, now I'll be able to, I was studying to be a personal trainer at the time. So I thought, okay, I'll be able to study and really catch up on podcasts and blog more. And instead I numbed through Netflix all day, every day. And it was my escape. And I did that for so many weeks that there was a point where my poor boyfriend, he's been through the biggest chunk of my learning the past 4 years. But he came into my room and was like, hey, do you want to go climbing? And I remember trying to find a pair of shorts, and I couldn't find a pair of shorts. I couldn't find them. And I just exploded, just absolute meltdown. And he was like, oh my gosh, like, what just happened? And I remember thinking, like, it's just shorts. Like, why am I so mad? But I had suppressed everything after losing my job. I didn't allow myself to have the ebb and flow of the emotions that came with it. And that happened quite a few times after I gave up alcohol. And then that happened again the second time I gave up alcohol. I just remember the anxiety that I felt on a day-to-day basis, like, was almost unbearable at some times. Like, I went to the doctors for heart palpitations because my heart rate was so high. And I was like, I'm not stressed. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. Like, why am I feeling this way? And it was because I was still suppressing all of my emotionality, but it was just heightened. Like, I felt the suppression more because I didn't have the, like, alcohol, or if I wasn't binging on Netflix or something, or distracting myself somewhere else, I was so aware of just this anxiety that I was feeling. And I didn't know at the time why that was so present and why I was having so many outbursts. Like, they were just uncontrollable, like crying uncontrollably. And just, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And now looking back, it was because I wasn't allowing myself to feel. I didn't know how to feel. I was so numb. And my body was trying to process everything, but I just didn't know how to do it. And so I didn't. And I would explode in all these different areas. Yeah.
And with you didn't know how to feel. I mean, if you go back to when you're a kid, like, is that something that's linked into your upbringing? Like, your parents are kind of like that?
It's really, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And I think, looking back, I associated, I don't even think it was my parents, because my mom, we were very emotional. Like, no one was like, you're not allowed to feel that. You're not allowed to feel that. So I don't know if it was a home thing, but I know it was like in school, when I think about where a lot of these things came from and where a lot of my need to achieve came from, it was school and my teachers. I don't want to put a negative association with religion or whatever, but for me personally, I grew up Catholic, and I was really, really, really afraid of messing up. And so I started just associating, I don't want to be sad, or I don't want to cry because I don't want to be seen as weak, or like, I don't want someone to discipline me for that. So I'm just not going to do that. I started associating anger as a bad thing. And so I would suppress anger, which would then turn into aggression towards other people, which is a whole other conversation, but that would happen there. And I think just with the school environment and the friend, just the way that my life sort of played out, I just did not want to be seen as weak.
Okay.
There was something in me that weakness was then directed to like emotionality. Like I didn't want to be too much. She's overly emotional. She's a too girly, or I kind of associated like femininity and as like high maintenance and all of, like I just bucketed emotionality and being feminine and all of that kind of stuff in a different box, and I labeled it as bad. And so I disassociated myself from that part of me and just became really hard and super masculine and very like, nope, I'm not going to show any emotionality because I can do it myself. I'm not weak. And that was just my mentality for so long.
Right. Which actually then maps on to you getting into sport and doing things the way that you did in terms of the training that you're doing and everything else that you're then describing around that.
Yeah. And I remember too, like, especially with fitness, people didn't see me as a very sports oriented person. I was not very coordinated growing up. I was always picked last on all of the teams. And so and I remember saying like, okay, I'm going to do cross country. And I remember one person in particular being like, oh, okay, good luck with that. And that, I think those little moments really shaped me as like, I'll prove them wrong.
Yeah.
I'll prove them wrong. I'm not weak, you know? And I also just think too, with pain, this is kind of veering, but going back to your question on just the way that I viewed emotion, I think, and this is not I don't think people do this out of they want to be helpful. You know, when you scrape your knee or you cry, people want to take that away. They want to take away that. They don't want you to feel that. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And I grew up with a very nurturing mom, and I'm not blaming her for that, but she didn't want us to be hurting. Right? Like any mom, she doesn't want their kid to be hurting. And so I think for me, we just associate pain or sadness or these things as like, oh, it's okay. Don't feel that. It's okay. It's okay. And so I think then you start thinking about pain and sadness as things you want to take it away. You want to get rid of it. I don't want to feel this. It's not okay to feel this. That's just sort of the story that I think we all as people have around those types of emotions.
Definitely. I mean, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking even from a client work perspective, like the default is always when someone tells you something that you want to say, oh, but you've got these other things going for you, or let's try and find a silver lining, or when actually sometimes it is like, cool, let's get in and just spend some time going through this pain and sitting with someone with it and talking about it and really honoring that for as long as it needs to be honored, as opposed to trying to sweep it under the rug, as opposed to really doing the work around it.
Yes. So many people. And it's again, like it's always coming from this place of like wanting to make people feel better.
Yep.
And that's okay. But I think we've gotten so used to that, like you said, we're not able to like allow ourselves to be in it. And I think too, like you said, a lot of people think, oh, well, there's so many people who are worse off than me. And so my pain is not as valid as their pain. So therefore I shouldn't be feeling this right now. Like I should be, and just, there's so many sayings right now of like good vibes only and positive thoughts only and all this kind of stuff. And so when these emotions of sadness or pain or anger or these normal human emotions come up for us that we've kind of bucketed as negative or bad, we think we're wrong for having that. And so we suppress it or push it away. And that's, I think, when we turn to these different external things to sort of numb that, because we've never been taught how to sit in it and be okay with sitting in it, or even what it looks like to do that. And so we don't know how. And so we turn to all of these other things because I always say what we resist persists. And so if we keep resisting the anxiety, if we keep resisting the sadness or the pain, it's going to keep showing up until we allow ourselves to feel it. And usually that's in the form of some sort of like outburst or breakdown or hitting this point where like, I can't do this anymore. I'm so full of emotion right now that I don't even know how to let it out. And so a lot of times it'll come out in ways that we're not expecting or towards people that we don't mean to to project it towards, someone moves the cup and you're like, don't move the cup. It comes out sometime, somewhere in the way that we're not expecting it to, because we haven't been dealing with it.
Yeah, definitely. And so what did your dealing with food then look like? So you've hit some point where you're like, okay, I can't do this anymore. How did your recovery look, or how did you kind of digging yourself out of that look?
Yeah, that was so I started rock climbing, and when I met my current boyfriend, he is definitely a all foods fit kind of person. And I was still placing rules around food when I met him. There wasn't a restricting mentality anymore, but there was definitely a good, bad thought process around food. And when I saw how much permission he gave himself to eat, that was when I thought, oh, interesting. Okay. So if I have pizza on Wednesday, it's still okay. And I really started digging into personal development and just the intuitive eating movement, and started looking at, okay, well, how does my body feel? And starting to reconnect to my body, because so many of us are in our brains when it comes to food, and we've disconnected from what our bodies are trying to tell us. And I always say this, our bodies are so smart, and they have all of the answers. And we've just become so afraid of listening to what they want because of all of this external stuff that we receive on a daily basis around you should and shouldn't do this, and this new diet and this new thing. And we start questioning like what our bodies are asking, and we start saying like, oh no, okay, I can't listen to that. So for me, it was all about learning how to be the filter of all of my information, because I think it's great to have all these different places to gather just information about food and exercise and all this kind of stuff. We have such a surplus of that, so why not take advantage of it? But we can also be the filter of what we decide works for us and what doesn't. So taking one thing in and saying, okay, interesting, that makes my body feel like this. I like that. So cool. Or this doesn't feel so great, so maybe next time I won't do that. And it was just really allowing, I just gave myself so much permission to experiment and to allow just to figure out what feels good and what doesn't. And so it became this whole process of what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And starting to just create that awareness around why I'm eating. Am I eating to numb something, or am I eating to fuel my body? Am I eating for pleasure? Which first, I think so many of us say that that's a bad thing. But I think if you're enhancing your experience with a piece of cake, like that's beautiful, versus, it just becoming so aware of what I was doing and what I was consuming and my intention behind it. Yeah. And then, okay, I'll stop there if you have any questions about that first.
No, I mean, what you're describing is basically how I work with clients, is getting people to understand context of like, there is no black and white with this stuff. It depends. And starting to notice like what works for you, how you enjoy eating food, and there's just so many different variables that come into it. But you have to be in a place where you can be open and curious and being able to allow that to happen, where it isn't kind of bound up in judgment and rules, etc.
Yes. And that, for me, a big part of this was really, really, really separating my weight from all of this and trusting that my body is going to get to the weight that it needs to be at in order to be at its optimal functioning place. And with all of this, and this is why I'm so passionate about the work that I'm doing around just emotionality and worthiness and all this kind of stuff, is because this piece, right, that's so important, to be curious and have permission and allow yourself to do all this kind of stuff. But if your worth as a human being is so wrapped up in what your external appearance looks like, it's going to be really hard to separate yourself from that. Yeah. Because you learning how to know your worth at the core, no matter what your external world or environment or body looks like, that's going to make this process so much better because you're not placing your worthiness in what you look like.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing I would also just add so that people are aware is I think you can get started even if you're unsure about that stuff.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if you're waiting for the point at which I feel cool about whatever my weight's going to be and I totally feel great in my body no matter what, and then I'll start like working on the food stuff, like that's just a scenario that is never going to happen.
No, I'm a big person. I always say, let's not do the grass is greener on the other side thing, or I'm going to wait until this for me to do something.
Yeah.
You have to, it's when we live life like that, I feel it's very hard to either get things done or we're going to be waiting for a certain feeling when we get to that end point. We're again relying on our external world to bring us something. Like that's just not going to work. Yeah. I definitely think the journey of all like the food stuff and the worthiness stuff, it goes hand in hand. And you learn about yourself and your worthiness. You learn about all like, how do I want to say this? You're learning more about yourself and you're creating more awareness when you're doing it together. Because if you eat a cookie and you start to feel guilt, that's when you can get curious and say, oh, interesting, I'm feeling super guilty right now. Where is that coming from? Or why am I feeling guilty? And then you start learning more about like how your worthiness is tied up or where it's tied up or how to start unpacking all of it. It definitely goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this massive overlapping Venn diagram.
Yeah, for sure. It's there's just so many pieces to it. And the thing that I always say too is like, allow it to be your journey. I think people become afraid or start placing rules around their personal development journey or their intuitive eating journey. And it's like, no, if we can just step back and again, learn how to be the filter and just create so much, like just be so aware and so curious and so compassionate with yourself, the journey can look however you want it to look. There is no right or wrong way to do it. And that's my biggest thing is just learn from everybody, but we all get to be our own individuals. So this all is going to apply differently. We've grown up differently. We've adopted different, like my story is different than your story, but we can still take pieces of each other's story and apply it to our own. And that's such a beautiful part of this work is that it doesn't have to look a certain way. So give yourself permission to be whatever you need to be in this process.
Yeah. And I would say as well, like people are often comparing themselves to what little bits they can try and pick up online of what other people's journey looks like. Yes. And when someone's curating their social media feed or even writing blog posts, like it's done in a way that takes out 95% of what actually went on in someone's journey. And so, people then fill it in with all of this information about what they imagine happened for someone else and why isn't it happening for them. And so, just being aware that things are often a lot messier than you are imagining in other people's lives and other people's recovery journeys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I keep saying I'm so passionate, but this work lights me up. I get so excited thinking about allowing people to be human. Yeah. And I think even though we're being vulnerable and there's a lot of people out there sharing their stories, I think there are pieces that people try and hide away because they don't want to be seen fully. And I'm really trying to show up in a way that's like, and of course, it's impossible to show the extent of your entire human journey online or, it's impossible to do that, I think, but I want to show up as real as possible and show people that like, I even struggle with some of this stuff today. Like, it's not about having this perfect journey. Like, there are so many moments where I've broken down crying, like, why is this happening? This is so hard. And it's allowed to be difficult. Like, people think that this it's like just a perfect straight trajectory towards recovered or like healed. Yeah. And it's not, it's up and down and all over the place. But the beautiful part of it is that you get to learn more and more and more about yourself, and you can make it look however you want, and just know that there is no end. There is no healed. You're always going to be learning something about yourself. And so if you can go in it with that mentality of like, this, some days are probably going to suck, and that's okay. And I'm going to allow myself to be in that. But then I also have the tools to allow myself to move past that. And I know what makes me feel really, really good. So I can turn to those things in those moments of sadness or in those moments of hardship. And I know that tomorrow might be better. And it's okay if I emotional eat one day, as long as I look at it later and think, okay, interesting. I did that because I'm not dealing with this anxiety. So let me do that. It's a process. It's not perfect. So just know that a lot of times what you see isn't the whole story, like you said.
Definitely. And so you said that it was a handful of years ago that you started getting into the whole personal development world and reading about intuitive eating. And at what point did you have that moment of like, maybe I want to do this as a job?
Yeah. It's funny. I think I've always known, ever since I realized that my relationship with food was a lot different than a lot of the people I was around. I started thinking, okay, I think I want to help other people with this. Like, I know that I know I can't be the only person struggling with this. And the more I started sharing my story, the more other people started sharing theirs as well. And so I thought, I didn't know that like life coaching or personal, I didn't know that this world really existed to the extent that it does. And when I started discovering people like Andrea Owen and seeing the kind of work that they did, I was thinking, okay, interesting. This could be a career path for me. And at the time I've been working all sorts of, I've always known, we were talking about this before we started recording, like I've always known I'm not a 9-to-5 person. It just wasn't me. Yeah. I really like creating my own schedule and I just like doing things on my own. And so I started thinking about possibly having my own business in this field for a while. And I had all sorts of different jobs throughout the way. And when I lost my job, I decided, okay, maybe I'll get my personal training certification and I'll do more of this intuitive movement type of thing. And then I found a certification program that focuses on helping people end their fight with their bodies. And it got a lot deeper. And that's when I really realized, like, interesting, the relationship we have with our body and the relationship we have with the world is a side effect about how we feel about ourselves. And so the work gets so much deeper, and I just became obsessed with it. And then a few months ago, I quit my full-time job and just went all in on this, because I just feel that this work is going, just with all of the work that we're all doing and the awareness we're creating around the diet culture and just being humans in general, I feel that this is really going to start just changing the world and how we show up as humans and allowing ourselves to be our fully expressed versions. And we don't have to hide ourselves anymore. We don't need to rely on our external world to feel a certain way. And I just feel that that's my mission, and I'm excited.
Nice. And so what was the training that you did?
It was called Hungry for Happiness. And it's funny because we don't really talk about food and body, or we talk a lot about body. We don't talk a lot about like food, because food is a side effect of the things that we're not dealing with internally. So it was a lot of, and when I went through the program, the first half of it is applying it on ourselves. And that's when I really felt a huge shift in the relationship I have with myself. And really, I've never known myself so deeply before. And that program really allowed me to dive deeper into like who I am and how it is that I want to show up in this world, and then how to help other people do the same.
And so with that work, and obviously with your podcast, you're then very open about talking about things that you've now gone through. Mm-hmm. Is it easy for you to do that on a podcast, but actually in your real life, you're still fairly guarded and this is more of a secret?
That's a good question. No. What I'm struggling with is I now know what it feels like to have intimate relationships where I share that part of me. And I'm pretty much an open book at this point. I feel I've always sort of been that way, where I've worn my heart on my sleeve with people close to me. And as I've started digging into this work and becoming more and more comfortable with who I am, I don't have any problem sharing that with people. But I think because other people are also really guarded, I've been seeking out people in my life who also want to have the more open, vulnerable conversations. And I'm just finding, again, it's no one's fault. It's how we've all been raised. It's hard for people to be vulnerable. And I find myself kind of shying away from large gatherings of people that I don't really know, because I'm almost finding I don't know how to have surface level conversations, because I'm so interested in like, what's the core of you? Like what is the juiciness, the vulnerable stuff that you want to share with me? And so that's where I'm almost struggling in that area of like not sharing too much when people meet me. Oddly.
No, and it's interesting you're saying that, because that is basically me, in that I would identify very much as an introvert. I don't have a problem with going to big social gatherings or anything along those lines, but I will always be the one that then ends up having a deep conversation with someone. And from my perspective, you can generally tell where someone wants to go with that stuff, and you can tell when you're knocking up against areas that someone doesn't want to talk about. And I think even within my group, because everyone knows this is what I do for a living, I have very open conversations with people, and I probably know a lot about things that other people don't know about, because they feel comfortable opening up about this. So I don't know, my sense with that is like, just you go and be you, and you'll find the people that resonate with that.
Yeah. And that's what I've been really figuring out over the past like year and a half or so, is that, okay. And I think too, I think for a long time, I always wanted to be the person that everyone liked, and to be okay with knowing that I'm not everyone's cup of tea, or that like, if I'm craving these deeper conversations, that when I go to a big social event, I'm probably only going to be talking to one or two people, and I'm okay with that now, rather than needing to go somewhere and have everybody like me, and just being okay with having a smaller, closer friend group. And 100%.
And is it more for you easier opening up about and talking about this stuff with new people? Because I know before you said this is a real big secret and friends didn't know. Like, are you able to talk about this stuff with them now, or that's still a struggle?
No, I've been, for some reason, ever since I started sharing the stuff online, I allowed other people because I knew that they probably saw it. So I started to just become more comfortable telling other people. And it was interesting just to hear their response of like, I was right there. Like a lot of my college friends, they thought, oh, I was like right there. Like, I can't believe that you were hurting this much and didn't share that with me. And it was like, no, it's not your fault. That's just how I was dealing with things. And so now it's just interesting to even talk about this stuff with them, because they didn't have any idea. But it's interesting to see where they want to go with it too. And some of the relationships that I've had have changed because this is what I really enjoy talking about now. And so I'm attracting, like you said, people who are interested in having those kinds of conversations. So it's more so, I'm just being myself and allowing myself to share what it is that I want to share, and just seeing who is attracted to that still, and who maybe is like, oh, okay, that's not my cup of tea anymore. And that's fine. So I've just been open and working through allowing myself to maybe even lose friends that I've had, or, invite new ones to come in, and just being okay with that, and knowing it's not attached to my worth, but more so it's just attached to who wants to meet me on that level. And that's okay if they don't.
Yeah. And have you had experiences where you're like with other friends, they've opened up and were like, me too, I was also struggling with this, but I didn't know how to talk to anyone about it?
Oh yeah, for sure. A few of my friends who they've also opened up about just struggling with food and body and exercise. And I feel like a few of my friendships have gotten a lot deeper because we've been able to talk about those kinds of things. And I just feel it's funny because as humans, I know that we deeply, deeply crave connection.
Yeah.
And I truly have like 1,000% believe that vulnerability and talking about the things that we might hide away most of the times, that truly creates deep connection. And that's why I want to share and be vulnerable, because I want to sort of give permission to other people to be able to do that, because I know that they're craving connection. And if they allow themselves to be vulnerable, they're going to find that kind of connection with other humans. And that's just my big vision with the world, is like all of us being able to get to this point of not seeing vulnerability as a weakness, but instead as a strength, and seeing our emotionality and just the things that we experience as humans as just a beautiful thing. How amazing that will be, because we'll be so comfortable with ourselves. We're not going to be judging ourselves, and therefore we're not going to be judging everyone around us. And we're all going to be able to live in this like fully expressed version of us. And like how many talents and just all of these beautiful things that will come from everyone being authentically themselves, truly. And I know that's like my big vision for the world, but that's what gets me so excited, is just allowing everyone to feel that deep connection from being vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. And the other part of it as well is, as you kind of described, like how isolating it is when you're going through all this. And the part of opening up is that actually you're going through something that many, many other people are also going through, and many other people who are in your life already are going through. And being able to open up then gives you someone to talk about these struggles with, and to really help out. Because I think so often with clients, they're like, no, I can't tell anyone about this. Like, oh, no one else would understand. And my sense is like, I bet you within your peer group, there is a lot of people who are going through the exact same thing as you, who also thinks no one else understands and no one else is experiencing this. And if you start to open up, you'll find a lot more support than you think is out there.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think about a few things in this. I think because like social media and the media and everything is so curated, and we're able to only portray the side of our lives that like looks really shiny and good, we start to then look at that and think, no one possibly understands the pain that I'm feeling right now, because all of these other people look so happy. So there's no way that they could be struggling with these kinds of things. But there's this statistic, and I'm blanking on the number, but it's like 90, it's a 90%, somewhere in there, 90 something percent of women, I think this is just women, but not even counting men in this, struggle with body image and hate their bodies. And it's amazing, like how many other people are also struggling with their self-worth and with, wanting people to like them, or struggling with a relationship, or we all are struggling with something. But it's just so easy right now to think their lives are so perfectly curated, there's no way that they could be struggling with it. But yeah, I guarantee if you break down just a little bit of that wall, you'll find some sort of relationship build. Like you'll find someone else is also going through something similar, and that you can connect with them on that level. And you're so not, like, the thing I always say is like, you're so not alone. Like, and I think people feel alone in their struggles, but you're not alone. There's so many resources and so many other people that are also struggling. So I always say that.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned resources there. Like, what are the resources that you have found helpful for yourself, and resources that you found helpful for clients that they've really resonated with?
That's a good question. I'll have to think. I'll probably have more. I'll think of more later,
Okay.
like randomly as I'm doing dishes or something. But I know there's so many good books and other just Instagram accounts and podcasts, and a few that come to mind, especially around just especially for women around period health and all that kind of stuff. Laura Brydon is someone that I always refer people to. She's always talking about just what that looks like. And I don't think people talk about that enough.
Cool. I've had her on the podcast before.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
She's great. And Holy Healed is another one I always refer people to. If you hashtag or search a hashtag intuitive eating, anti-diet, I'm thinking of hundreds of different Instagram accounts in general that just talk about something different when it comes to what your body quote should look like, because there is no should there. It's just giving yourself that unconditional permission to allow yourself to have your own journey. We've talked about Andrea Owen. She's always my go-to with just really anything personal development, especially if you're looking at sobriety. Tiffany Hahn, she's more of a branding type person, but she is also super vulnerable and real on her Instagram feed and talks a lot about her own sobriety journey. And what other podcasts can I think of? I know Maddie Moon has really helped me a lot with just the feminine side of things and allowing myself to step into the softer side and just, I think you've had her on before.
I had her on, but I had her on when I first started this podcast years ago. And I know since then she is she's much shifted. Gone in a different direction to anything we really chatted about.
Yeah. Yeah. She's shifted a little bit from, I think, food and body to more masculine, feminine type stuff.
Yeah.
That was also really helpful. But honestly, I think, and in terms of just resources or things that you can do to help with this journey, is like we've sort of talked about, look at the people you're surrounding yourself with. And it's okay to be choosy with who you share your story with. Obviously, don't walk up to I mean, you could if you wanted to, but like walking up to a stranger on the street and just being like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. It's that you might not be getting the kind of results that you want, but you are allowed to be choosy with who you share your story with. And if you surround yourself with, there's so many online communities. I'll share this now. 2 other coaches and I just recently put together a community called She Craves Truth on Facebook. And we are going to be doing weekly calls to talk about all things food and body and to answer questions that people don't really answer right now in this area. So like there stuff like that, where you can be part of these communities of other women or other men going through these kinds of things. And I know people are super accepting and willing to hear your story, and you can connect with other women going through those similar things, and look at how your news feed is filled. You can mute people now, where you don't have to like unfollow people, but you can mute people that cause, I don't want to say avoid triggers, because triggers lead to things you can learn about yourself, but you don't have to trigger yourself every day. So you can unfollow people that don't make you feel good and start filling your news feed with things that are supporting your journey and all of this. And there's so many books. I know Intuitive Eating is a really good book. What's the other one? Oh, I'm blanking.
That's cool.
But yeah, there's just podcasts. There's so many resources right now in this space that are so helpful in this journey. So just really paying attention to what you're consuming on a day-to-day basis. Cool.
Well, look, I'm going to put all of that in the show notes. And if there's other ones you think of when doing the dishes, you can email them over and I can add them in as well. One thing I wanted to come back to, and you talked about earlier on in terms of having all these ways of numbing out so you didn't have to deal with your emotions. So how do you deal with your emotions now? Like what are either techniques or what are things that you do?
Okay, Chris, this is my favorite. This is like my hot thing right now. Like I love talking about this. So and I want to start this off by saying this takes practice. And again, coming back to, we're so easy. It's so easy for us to be so mean to ourselves and to to fill everything that we do. There's so much hate and shame with our own bodies and with our own emotionality and with our thoughts and all that kind of stuff. And the thing that I always want to preface is, if your best friend or your parents or your loved one or someone came to you with the problem, like the problems that you're struggling with, if they came to you with those things, like how would you respond to them? You would never say, "Oh, you suck, I hate you," or like just suck it up. Like you would meet them with some sort of compassion. So look at how you meet other people that you love in your life with that compassion, and start to see how you can bring that to yourself. Because the compassion piece of this is such a big part of moving through this work. If we're mean to ourselves and shaming ourselves constantly, it's going to be really hard to move forward with like awareness and curiosity when you're coming from this place of hate. So I like to talk about this in a couple, because like emotion is just energy in motion. And if we can look at it in that way, in kind of the same way we look at food, there is no good, bad. It's all just energy. And when we're experiencing these different energies, they want to be moved through us in different ways. For example, anger is one of my favorite ones to talk about. I think especially as women, we're told that anger is bad, it's unladylike, you're not allowed to express it. Or maybe you've seen it be expressed in your home life or in your past, and so you've associated it with like not a good thing, or it's bad, I can't feel that. But anger itself, again, is just energy in motion. When it turns destructive is when it switches to aggression. And that is when you take that anger and project it towards other people in your life. And that's something we want to avoid. But anger is something that we can process really easily. My favorite way is vocally. So I will either scream as loud as I possibly can into a pillow when I'm feeling angry, driving in my car and just screaming profanity, or just that one is really helpful, or just screaming, like getting it out. Punching pillows is also really helpful. You go to a boxing class, like any kind of like, again, like pushing that energy out, that's really going to be helpful in expressing that. When we're talking about sadness, that's really like just cry. If you're, again, for me, I've always associated that with some sort of weakness. And I think for men especially, that's also associated as like, be a man, you can't cry. But again, crying is such a good way to get out that sadness. So allow yourself to be sad. If you want to lay in bed for a few hours and cry, or just be sad and be with yourself, like that's okay. Give yourself permission to do that. Anxiety. And I guess this, I explain it a little bit more with anxiety because it's one of those emotions that we tend to like really push away or try and fix and get rid of. But you can do what I'm about to say with all of the other emotions too. It's just noticing. So we'll use anxiety as an example. When you start to feel anxious, and with any emotion too, watch how you talk about it. We so often say, I am anxious, but you are not anxious. You are not anxiety. You are experiencing the sensation of anxiety. So separate yourself, like don't identify with it, because when we identify with it, it's so hard to pull ourselves away and take a 360 view because we're so in it. But when you are just when you're realizing that you're just the vessel that these things pass through, you're just allowing the sensation to have its space, and you're not the sensation, you're able to kind of step away from it and not identify so thickly, or so you're able to get yourself out of the thick of it and be more be more of the observer when it comes to it. So when you're feeling anxious, you can do this anywhere. If you're at work or if you're home, like go somewhere quiet so you can go into the bathroom or whatever. Just sit with yourself for 5 minutes or 2 minutes. Give yourself just some time. Close your eyes and just start to name where you're feeling that sensation in your body. What is it doing in your body? Like get out of your head and go into your body. That takes practice, because again, we've disassociated from our bodies for so long, but practicing getting out of your head and into your body, because the head and the thoughts, that's what will create more of the anxiety, because we can easily spiral. But when we're in our bodies, we're able to feel the sensation. So what's happening? okay, well, my shoulders are crunching in and I'm feeling a tension in my chest area. My heart's beating faster. I'm sweating. My palms are really sticky. Like, what's happening? Just notice that. Start to name it. And then allow the sensation to be there. And I know that sounds crazy, but when we can just allow the sensation to have space, it will go away. So how much allowance can you have? And then we can go into all sorts of like different steps of like bringing the sensation of love while you're feeling anxiety at the same time, and then love will overtake. And there's just multiple different steps that can go into it, but just allowing yourself to feel it when it's happening, instead of like pushing it away, it will leave. So allow yourself to experience it in the moment. And then again, look at your stories that you have around it. Like if it's, I'm not allowed to be sad, I'm not allowed to experience pain, I'm not allowed to be anxious, shift that. We're allowed to be the creators of our stories. So shift it to, I'm allowed to experience pain. There's growth in pain. My anxiety is just trying to teach, or not my anxiety, see, I identify. The anxiety is just trying to teach me something. I'm allowed to experience this. So it's, again, just shifting our stories and then creating space for the sensation to be there, and just allow the energy to pass through, whatever that looks like. You can also associate a sound with it. Like, what does the anxiety sound like? Get it out, move, dance. Just get the sensation out of your body. Let it be there and let it pass. That was a lot.
There was, and there's loads that I'm now thinking of because of all that. So one of the things, and in terms of the original piece, in terms of that self-compassion and is thinking of the work of like Kristen Neff or Tara Brach. Kristen Neff has a book called Self-Compassion. Tara Brach, I think it's Radical Self-Acceptance. Like both of them are really good resources in that realm. And then in terms of your like being okay with certain emotions, and then emotions are temporary and they will kind of take care of themselves. I mean, that's very much the whole point of meditation, and why I think meditation is having, I don't know, really a time in the sun, and has changed from being this kind of woo-woo-y thing that was very fringe to now, very much hitting the mainstream, because the point of meditation, or at least some forms of meditation, is just to notice, and to notice how really emotions have quite a short half-life unless you start attaching a story to them. So if you're able to just be that observer, which is like a million times easier said than done, but if you're able to do that and then not create some big story around it, it will typically take care of itself. And then the final one that came up was when you were talking about like screaming into a pillow, or punching things, or having a cry. Is that I'm currently reading Emily and Amelia Nagoski's book Burnout. So I've had Emily Nagoski on the podcast before. She wrote Come As You Are, which is an amazing book. And in Burnout, one of the things they talk about is the difference between a stressor and then the stress response in the body. So a stressor could be your boss. It could be an argument you had with your partner. It could be the thing that is annoying you or causing stress, whereas the stress response is the physiological response that takes place within the body in terms of cortisol, adrenaline, the whole HPA axis, all of that kind of working in terms of our fight and flight and freeze system that has kind of been there as we've evolved. And one of the things they talk about in the book is there's a big difference between dealing with the stressor and dealing with the stress response. And that just trying to deal with the stressor doesn't actually take away their stress response. And so you have to deal with those two things separately. And some of the things that they talk about are things that you just talked about there in terms of doing something physical, having a cry. There's, I think, 7 or 8 things they talk about, having laughter, social connection, a level of intimacy. So they talk about John Gottman's work on a 6-second kiss or a 20-second hug, but other just ways to end that stress response cycle and complete the cycle, because when you do that, then certain emotions will start to disappear or to start to dissipate, because you're not having them really bolstered up by the different chemicals going on within the body.
1,000%. Yeah, it's paying attention to the external circumstances of what's causing the stuff that's going on in your body, and definitely like separating them. A lot of the times we think if we manipulate our external world, then the things that we're experiencing in our body will go away, which, if you're already experiencing sadness or anger and then you try and control and manipulate your external environment, there's still going to be the residual anger and anxiety or whatever is happening. So learning how to be with your body, be with yourself, deal with what it is that you're feeling on a physiological level, and then looking at your external world and think, okay, what is it that's causing these kinds of things? And yeah, like exactly what you said, looking at them as two separate things, and being like compassionate with yourself and taking time for yourself. And I want to go back to the meditation piece, like that. Meditation has been extremely transformational. Yeah, I'm struggling with my words today. In my life, because, and I think, like you said, for so long I had this idea of what meditation was, which is, this woo thing that you don't think and you have no thoughts. And I always thought I was doing it wrong because anytime I would sit down, I would have all these thoughts, and I'm like, ugh, this is not right. So I would stop doing it. But I had a couple people on my podcast a few months ago, and they talk about meditation so beautifully, where it isn't about turning off your thoughts. It's about, because when you think about it, if you don't give yourself space to be quiet, when you finally get quiet, there is going to be a lot that comes up. And so it's just allowing yourself to have space to just be with yourself and allowing whatever to come up to be there. It's all about just allowance and creating more connection within yourself, and stop trying to push away parts of you. Just allow it to be there, because when you allow everything to be there, you're creating connection within yourself. And so I think meditation is such a beautiful way to have that allowance and to just let the things that need to come up. And you might realize, like, oh, okay, I'm feeling a lot of like anger in me right now. Maybe that's something I want to go process. So it is such a beautiful thing. And it's a lot of the work that I do with my clients is through different meditation practices. And I actually, on this conversation of emotionality and all of this kind of stuff, I just released yesterday whenever you release this, it won't be yesterday, but I just released it's called 5 Days to Jumpstart Your Body Acceptance Journey. And essentially I talk about all of these foundational pieces of how to process your emotions and what it looks like to change your story to a lot of these things about, your emotions or your body and the stories that you have around yourself and all this kind of stuff. And I actually have, within those 5 days, you also get 5 meditations that help break down all of this and help you. It's a good guide. It's a good intro into meditation because they're guided, and it sort of gives you this like intention on how you want to spend that time in the meditation. So I can give you the form for people to sign up for that, but it's free, and it's a really great way to kind of get yourself into meditation and start uncovering the stories that you have around your emotionality and your body and all of that.
Perfect. Yeah, I will definitely put that in the show notes. And I think what I've found with meditation, and I always, whenever I mention it on the podcast, I have to add the caveat of like, I'm a terrible meditator. I do it very, very infrequently. I never do it as much as I'm telling clients that they should be doing it. So I hold my hands up and say, like, this is something where I definitely don't like walk my walk or walk my talk with this. But meditation is one of those things where you can be taught how to meditate while you meditate. And yes. So I really like, the apps I typically recommend are like Headspace, which I think is amazing, and also Waking Up. Like both of those I find great because they teach you how to meditate while you meditate.
Absolutely. I recommend those. Those are the two I always say too. And I always think about this too, like before bed, I have a playlist of just yoga songs, just a playlist of really calming songs that sometimes I'll listen to before bed, or if there's a time throughout the day where I'm feeling a lot of energy in my body or super like worked up, I'll just put on that playlist and just sit and just be quiet and allow myself to just think or whatever comes, and it can look, like you said, however you want it to look. It just is a great time to be with yourself, which we don't ever give ourselves time. So it can be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, like make it however you want. And guided meditations are so beautiful because you don't have to think like I'm doing this wrong. They tell you what to do and you can follow that, or you can just sit with yourself and just be like, give yourself that space. It's all however you want it to look. And that's, again, make it your journey. Like it doesn't have to look a certain way. I think we all, have a morning routine and do all of this stuff. And I think the reason why all of these things exist is to help you feel better, or help you feel good, or give you energy. And so just figure out what gives you energy, what makes you feel good. And that could shift on a daily basis, but just have some tools in your toolbox that you can pull out and make it look however you want. You don't have to place rules around all of this kind of stuff. Just give yourself permission. I just keep saying that. It's so important.
Yeah. And I would say like I'm a terrible meditator, but I'm good at creating space for myself in terms of I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time outside or walking and trying to, it's more difficult now to have alone time, but trying to have time for myself where I can just decompress and do that fairly regularly throughout the day and throughout the week. Because I know how beneficial it is. And when I'm not doing that, how quickly things start to spiral.
Yeah. Or even the thing I'm really trying to work on right now, because I tend to have this hustle mentality and push and work. Like I need to do this task so I can do the next task. And two things that I'm trying to practice right now is, one, looking at my language around how I talk about things. So instead of being like, I have to do the laundry, say like, I get to do the laundry, and looking at life as like, this is just an opportunity rather than being the poor me, kind of everything's happening to me, and feeling powerless in my life. Instead, looking at it as like, I get to do all of this. Yeah. How can I create my day? And then also being mindful throughout those activities instead of rushing from one task to another. If you find that there's a lot on your plate, how mindful can you be in that one task? Like really feel the water on your hands as you're doing the dishes, or like pay attention to what's happening when you're putting the stuff in the dryer. Just being more mindful throughout your day is a good way to just create more presence and peace now, instead of always thinking about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Just learning how to just be present and mindful in every activity that you're doing can also help with just creating more time for yourself when you're doing those things that are on your to-do list. Yeah.
And so you said just a moment ago about you've started a Facebook group with two other women. Is that the same two people? Because I saw that you're also doing some events as well. Is that with the same people?
No, so I got all sorts of stuff right now. Okay. That group is going to be the one that She Craves Truth. That's a Facebook online community. We're going to be doing weekly calls on Tuesday at 8 Eastern time. So that will just look like you can just hop in those calls, and we're going to be just talking about a particular topic that week and just make it a group discussion. And it's going to be really, really fun, super informative, and whatever topics that are hot on people's minds around food and body and confidence and all that kind of stuff we're going to be covering there. The other event series, so this is an event series that I'm going to be doing with two other women that is taking place right now in Park City, Utah. So if anyone's in the Utah area, we're going to be doing an event on June 8th. And this is all about, we're focusing on mindfulness for this, and kind of for the reasons that I just spoke about. We're so in the next thing, we're never really present. So with these event series, we're going to be doing some sort of silent activity. So for this one, we're going to be doing a silent hike. We're just, for the uphill portion, we're going to be quiet and just be mindful and be in nature and just really pay attention to what's going on in your body and around you. And then we're going to be following that up with breakfast and a workshop series that will be focusing on a specific mindfulness topic, where we'll be giving you actual tools that you can take home with you to practice in your day-to-day life around just meditation and being grounded, and also how to be more mindful in your day-to-day so that you can start living life on your own terms instead of always feeling like you're burnt out living life for everybody else. It's kind of bringing it back to the self. So that's our first event, going to be taking place in Park City on June 8th. And then we're hoping to make that into a more regular event series where we'll be hopefully taking that all over Utah and then all over the country soon enough. And that, again, mindfulness being the main focus there. So that's happening as well. I have lots of things to give everybody right now.
Yeah. Definitely. And how do you describe what you do? I know we haven't really touched on this in terms of specifically what it is you do with clients. So how do you describe that?
Yeah. So I call myself a body and self-acceptance coach, and I help people stop fighting themselves so that they can live the life they desire and ultimately feel at home in their bodies. And so that I deal a lot with food and body just because that's very common, but just again, like things like perfectionism and people pleasing, and where you just find yourself living for everybody else and not really sure of who you are, who you want to be, and feel like if you're feeling, I always say at home in your body, and like so often we don't know what that means. We feel at war with our bodies, with ourselves. So my main mission is to help you feel at home in your body, which means really truly knowing your worth at the core and being able to step into the version of yourself that you've always wanted to be but are too afraid to be because you're living life for everybody else. So there's multiple different layers in there, but it's releasing that shame and hate around yourself and stop fighting yourself and learning how to have acceptance and live the life that you want to be living. So I do one-to-one client work right now where I really help you get super clear on what that looks like for you. All of my one-to-one client packages I follow a formula, but that formula is extremely customized to what it is that you want. And we get extremely clear on who it is that you want to be and what it is that you want to be doing with this life, and help you get there and feel at home in your body ultimately.
Awesome. I mean, how often would you have someone come to you where food isn't part of it, or that just doesn't happen?
It's rare, because I feel that most of the people that I've been attracting, just with the kinds of guests that I've had on my podcast and just the messaging that I talk about, and because my story is so heavily related around food, a lot of people do come to me with food.
Sure.
But it's interesting because the more we do the work, the more that we find that it's not really about the food. There's something else driving it. And so my main mission will be to help figure out, okay, well, food seems to be something that you're struggling with, but what is underneath that? And so we really get clear on what's driving that and help. I talk about core beliefs all the time with my work and on my podcast, because so often the behavior that we're engaging in, that we're trying to change, is coming from this deep-seated belief that we're usually not aware of. And until we change that belief, the behavior that we're engaging in, it's still going to keep coming back because that's what our body is used to. So my main goal is to help you get really clear on what it is that you believe about yourself, which ones are not serving you, and what is it that you want to step into so that you can release the shame and the behaviors that you have around food that aren't working right now. But a lot of my clients have food. It's like they come to me with food, but rarely do we talk about the food.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, look, a lot of what you're describing there, I think, overlaps with how I work with clients as well. So yeah, I think we're on the same page with this stuff.
Totally, it's important.
Yeah. So look, Stephanie, where should people be going if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, I'm very active on Instagram, and that's just my name, at Stephanie Dankelson. And you can find all of my free and paid resources and how you can work with me. All of that is linked up in my bio. You'll be able to find my website from there, which is just www.stephanie-dankelson.com. And I also have all my resources there. And then my podcast, which is Move with Radiance. And you can find that on iTunes, Spotify, really anywhere that you can get your podcast. So come find me on Instagram and let me know that you found me through Chris.
Perfect. Well, look, this has been awesome chatting with you. Is there anything we didn't go through that you want to mention?
No, I feel like everything that I am super stoked about right now, we've touched on. So thank you for asking such good questions and for digging in. And this was great.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thanks again.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7, health.com.